news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
Good evening, I'm Saul Saenz, and this is ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition. The El Paso Catholic Diocese is home to approximately 700,000 Catholics, which means that many of you likely attended church today. But while many were attending church, changes to the Catholic Church was discussed during what's called a synod. That's when the Vatican in Rome hosts a gathering of bishops and others to discuss such topics as women's participation in church, whether or not women can become ordained deacons. Right now, a male deacon can marry couples or even preside funerals. Women cannot. This despite the fact that women make up the majority of the congregations attending church. And you may recall Pope Francis made headlines when he suggested that same-sex marriage could be blessed on a case-by-case basis, so long as those unions were not viewed as a Catholic marriage. That leads to the topic of LGBTQ and the Vatican's stance on that and other issues that have changed since the birth of the Catholic Church. While no firm decisions were made on these topics, they were discussed. Tonight, a special treat. ABC-7 Extra gets to talk to one person who was actually there during this year's Synod in October. That person joins us now for the discussion, Reverend Ivan Montelongo, who is the Judicial Vicar and Vocations Director for the Diocese of El Paso. Reverend Montelongo was one of many who gathered at the Vatican for the Synod in Rome this past October. Also joining us is Surya Kalra. Ms. Carla has been a representative and organizer gathering information for past synods. So let's get underway. Reverend, let's start with you. Women right now make up the majority of congregants in the Catholic Church, yet they don't have the same participation as do men. Was this part of the discussion, the synod's discussion? What was discussed, and more importantly, what was resolved?
Hi, thank you for having us. It is a pleasure being here with you. And yes, it was discussed. Among many things, of course, the main topic of the synod was how to become a more welcoming church, a more inclusive church that gives voice to all of its members. And as you said, women are the half of our congregants, right? They're even the majority of our congregants in many occasions. So how do we highlight their participation, their role, and not only doing what the priest says or what the deacon says, right? But how do we, synodality is, how do we include all of the people of God in the decision-making process? How do we give roles of participation, of priority to everyone? So it was discussed, yes.
Okay, let me turn the question around and ask you, how do you include women in the Catholic Church? And do you foresee the possibility that women may become deacons?
So answering the second part of the question first, it is a discernment process, right? So the gathering of the synod, a synod is an assembly of bishops, right? When they ponder questions, they make decisions, but they don't make them lightly. They take their time. It's a very slow process considering the theology, the history, all the implications. So to answer that part of the question, I don't know. But the Pope would remind us frequently in the assembly, the protagonist is the Holy Spirit. So whatever the Spirit prompts in the church, we pray that will be what we go ahead with. But how do we involve women in our congregation, in our church? Especially, it was highlighted that they need to be a part of decision-making processes, right? That it is not just one person's job to make decisions. So in parishes, we have what are called pastoral councils, for example, or finance councils. And men and women, lay people, they need to be a part of those bodies, those government bodies. Also, in the diocese, we have a diocesan finance council and a diocesan pastoral council. And women are also an important part of it. They participate in that way, not only of our services, but also in the decisions, in the decision-making process.
Okay, Ms. Kalra, you participated in these types of, or this information gathering process for the synods in the past. Has this topic come up in the past, and what are your thoughts on this? Has it been resolved? Do you expect more to happen in the future? Because one of the things that we were talking about off camera is this is an evolutionary process. We're not, I guess, conducting the Catholic Mass the way we were 200 years ago or 100 years ago, right?
Yes, I mean, so something that was very helpful to me, I work for an organization called ABC-7 Border Interfaith, and Bishop Mark had invited our organization to help and partner with the diocese in the synod, the local diocesan synod process. But in preparation for that, we read a lot of Pope Francis's teachings, on this. And one of the books that we read was called Let Us Dream, that Pope Francis was writing during the pandemic. And he has a very interesting section about his thoughts on the role of women in the church that I think is also very helpful. And he says that women are the base, many times, of the church. They are, whether it's formal or informal leadership that they take, without the women, it's very difficult to have the culture of the church that we see. During the synod process itself, I can't count exact numbers, but there was probably more women participating in the formation process of conducting the synod. So I think that's something to really be lifted up and recognized, is that, these bigger questions, I wasn't part of the global synod, but at a local level, women are very, very, very much integrated in the church. Yeah. They're the abuelas, they're the mothers, they're the ones who are looking after,
that's key.
Thinking about
the
people.
Mothers, because without a mother, we wouldn't have Christianity, right? Another topic of discussion, and very relevant here in the borderland, is the protection for migrants. As you well know, thousands of migrants are coming through our borders every year. What was discussed, and more importantly, what was the outcome, Reverend? When it comes to migrants?
Migration was a central part of the discussion. And even one of those nights after we finished the sessions, because we would have a morning session and then an evening session, and around 7:30 p.m., we joined Pope Francis in a special prayer for all those migrants who have died, especially in that reality in Europe, in the Mediterranean Sea. It was discussed how migrants enrich the life of a church community. And of course, we live it here, we know about it here in our reality. But one of the realities that struck me was, for example, migrants in the Arabian Peninsula, for example, in which the church is strong thanks to migrants. So the point of conversation was, we should not see them as a burden. We should not see us as providing just help to them, but they also have very important things to contribute to our society, to our church community. It was agreed upon that was the case.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'll ask about the topic of discussion having to do with transgender godmothers or godfathers. Was that discussed? You're watching ABC-7 Extra, Sunday edition, where news comes first.
There's DNA. Then there's heavy-duty DNA. HDNA. It's engineered into every aspect of the GMC Sierra HD. With the pulling power to prove it. Tow hitches of the world, prepare for glory.
New 2024 Sierra heavy-duty models arriving weekly. Stop by your GMC dealer to make your selection. See your El Paso Las Cruces GMC dealers.
What's the secret to a busy day? Buy El Paso Rewards.
I need hairspray.
It's a free rewards program that allows us to communicate with customers, understand business trends to make better business decisions. It's easy and free. It's free for all businesses in El Paso. El Dragon?
I get $5 off, right?
The program's available for many different types of businesses. All I had to do was go to epbusinessstrong.org to apply.
I got my points. I got my points.
Do you need your COVID and flu shot this season? 3A Research is conducting a clinical trial with Moderna, evaluating an investigational COVID-19 and flu vaccine. Subjects must be at least 50 years old and not have had the COVID or flu shot this season. This study has up to 4 visits, study-related physical exams, and procedures at no cost. Compensation for time and travel up to $600 will be provided. Please contact our office at 915-598-8888 or visit us at 3asites.com.
I say this every day. I am so thankful for our employees. Casa Buick GMC opened in 2021, and in only our second year of operation, we've become the #1 selling Buick GMC dealer in West Texas and New Mexico. It doesn't hurt that GMC is one of the hottest brands on the market, and not to mention the all-new Buick Envista.
Get the new 2023 GMC Sierra 1500 Denali with $8,000 off MSRP.
Casa Buick GMC.
Home of the nice guys.
Yeah!
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition. Tonight's topic is the Vatican's Synod, a gathering of bishops and others to discuss the future of the Catholic Church. I also want to welcome back my guest, Reverend Ivan Montelongo, who is Judicial Vicar and Vocations Director for the Diocese of El Paso. Reverend Montelongo was one of many who attended the Synod in Rome this past October. Also joining us is Surya Kalra. Ms. Kalra has been a representative and organizer gathering information for past synods. Now, another one of the topics, Reverend, of discussion during last month's Synod was gay marriage. Pope Francis has said in the past that same-sex marriage will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Reverend, what does it mean and what exactly was discussed?
It was not exactly that way. What was discussed, especially in the Synod, was how do we become a church that includes everyone, that is a home for everyone, because we talk about the church as a house of God, and because we are the family of God, everyone is welcome in our church, no matter where they stand, no matter what their past has been. Everyone is welcome. And so one of the points of discussion was how are we there for LGBTQ persons without judgment? And Pope Francis has talked about this before. Who am I to judge? If a person tries to come to God, if a person strives to seek God, who are we as a church to put barriers on for those people?
Very progressive thinking.
Well, I would say it goes to the roots of the gospel, right? Jesus did not reject people who came to him. Especially, he was open to those who had difficult pasts, who were in difficult situations.
Okay. Ms. Kalra, was LGBT discussed as much as 2 years ago as it's being talked about now? If you recall, I mean, you organized local synods and whatnot before the synod in the Vatican. Was it being discussed as much as it's being discussed today?
So yeah, so when we were organizing the local synod in El Paso, Father Ivan and I worked to create a training for people to learn how to have conversations, how to listen to people. We call these conversations, in organizing terminology, house meetings, but simply it's a conversation where you want to be as open as possible to hearing other people's lived experiences. And time again, people's lived experiences are that maybe they are a part of the LGBTQ community, maybe their children are, and they spoke about what their relationship is with the church given their sexual orientation. So there were stories of mothers whose children felt rejected by the church, and there were stories of people who felt embraced. It really depended on, the kind of atmosphere that the church community was creating. But what I thought was very admirable, right, and what Father Ivan is saying also, is that I think what the church teaches, what Pope Francis teaches, is this culture of encounter that absolutely relies on being open to the full dignity of whoever it is you're talking to, and really embracing and understanding that there are differences, and that it's okay that there are differences, and we may have differences of opinion, but that there's a commitment to loving all. That is very important to highlight, right? And so I think that Bishop Mark was open to any kind of topic coming out, for people being able to really share that Pope Francis is leading by example. It's just a very good thing for the church to be doing.
Okay, Reverend, was the Israel-Hamas war discussed during the Synod, and what was the discussion, if at all?
It was discussed, not in particular, but in general, all the wars that are going on, because the members of the assembly came from all the world, and so there were people coming from the Holy Land. There were people coming from Ukraine, from Russia, from Syria, all these places that have been afflicted by war, all these places that in some sense have been neglected by the international community. And so, yes, it was discussed how we as a church, who are already present there, can help advance the peace, but also how we as an international community, as different countries, etc., can advocate for peace. We were constantly praying for peace. If you followed the Synod gatherings and prayers, Pope Francis called us frequently to pray. So we had a rosary for peace, we had a prayer for migrants, we had another special prayer for peace in the Holy Land. It was very much at the heart of the conversations.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra Sunday edition. Still ahead, there's still one other Synod schedule. I'll ask my guests if they will take part and what issues still need to be discussed. We'll be right back.
There are trucks, and then there's the GMC Sierra. Available with the connected driving experience. And the world's first 6-function multi-pro tailgate. GMC Sierra. It's the truck. Or step up to GMC with $4,500 purchase cash on select 2023 Sierra models.
See your El Paso Las Cruces GMC dealers.
Fentanyl struck our family a little over 2 years ago when my son Cameron, at the age of 19, died of fentanyl poisoning. Cameron made an incredibly poor choice and purchased a pill off of social media, not realizing it was a completely fake pill. He just wanted some relief from his anxiety. That one pill contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. One pill definitely kills. It's really a matter of life and death.
Visit onepillkillstx.com, sponsored by HHSC.
Knock, knock! It's those Black Friday doorbusters all month long at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso. Like 0% APR on Tucson's and Santa Fe's, no interest for 5 years, and 0 down on all new Hyundais, Elantras, Konas, Tucson, Santa Fe's, Palisades, all with 0 down today, and 0 payments until February 2024. Kick off the holiday season with some extra cash in your pocket with 0 down and 0 payments for 90 days. Check out daily doorbusters all month long at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso.
Welcome back to this third and final segment of ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition. I also want to welcome back my guest, Reverend Ivan Montelongo, who is the Judicial Vicar and Vocations Director for the Diocese of El Paso. Reverend Montelongo was one of many who gathered at the Vatican during the Assembly of the Synod this past October. Now, also joining us is Surya Kalra. Ms. Kalra has been a representative or an organizer gathering information for past synods. Now, Reverend Montelongo, were there topics discussed during last month's synod that stood out for you that perhaps we haven't talked about?
Two main topics that stood out to me were, first, the baptismal dignity of everyone. All of us who are baptized have received a special dignity, a new life. And so there's a lot of emphasis sometimes in our church about the priest or the ordained minister, but not enough sometimes about all the laity, right? Because we in the church believe that all of us, in some sense, are priests. So are we all living up to our baptismal dignity? Are we engaging in the mission of our church? Or are we just content with the faithful coming to Mass and then leaving, and then coming to Mass and then leaving? We all have a mission, and so we need to foster that discovery of our own mission in particular. And another topic was the digital environment, how we as a church are present or are not as present in this new missionary territory, which is the internet, all the social media, not just as a means for evangelization, for spreading the gospel, but really it is like a culture that we inhabit, right? It is a place that we inhabit, that we spend sometimes even hours in.
Yes.
And how are we as church being present in that privileged missionary territory?
Just out of curiosity, what was Pope Francis' take on that, on the internet, and how we should either be more involved or involve more the internet in Mass, or just this discussion of Catholicism?
He was very open. He says that sometimes we as shepherds, and especially him in his ministry as shepherd, We need to let the people of God to find roots, right? To find the pathways and then follow them sometimes. It's not us who all the time have to be leading, but we have to be led by them as well. And I think in this aspect of the internet, he very much is perhaps from the old school, right? He doesn't watch TV except for like maybe important things, but he is very aware of the need to be a presence, a strong presence in the internet.
A particular interest as we're sharing this information about Pope Francis and how he embraces the internet and whatnot, there's some pictures of you on your phone showing them to the Pope.
Well, I came up to him and asked him, because I'm vocation director for our diocese, promoting vocations to the priesthood, to consecrated life, so I told him, Holy Father, would you mind, is it okay with you if you send a message to the youth of El Paso about their own vocation? And he said, sure, no problem. So he's always so open, so humble, and so joyful. He's a very funny man too. He's a great
He has a good
shepherd.
sense of humor?
Yes, he has an excellent sense of humor.
Ms. Calderon, what would you like to see be discussed during the next Synod? What is the date for the next Synod, and what would you like to be discussed?
Well, so there's the Global Synod will gather again next year, right? But in the meantime, I think something that's very important to remember is that there's a synodal way of being that I think Pope Francis and Bishop Mark and others are trying to cultivate. And to be synodal, to be a synodal church means to be a church that listens. And so, that's a practice that I think in El Paso, many churches are continuing to do and develop, right? So just a couple of days ago, one of the churches, Christ the Savior in the Northeast, they have been meeting with parents who are waiting during the catechism during the confirmation, right? To hear what's going on with them. What's affecting them, what pressures are they seeing? And they're hearing about drugs in the schools, they're hearing about just this fear around their kids going in the wrong direction. So now they're inviting those parents in to be a part of how does the church then have more activity, have more things that they can offer for kids to be a place that guides children and families, right? And so that way of being is something that I think is very interesting, that there's a lot of churches locally that are just taking up this call to be more synodal, to be more open to listening to people and what their suffering is, what their experiences are.
One question I neglected to ask you, Ms. Calderon, is that the women's involvement in the Catholic Church, do you think it's enough, or do you believe that the Catholic Church should be more inviting and have perhaps female deacons? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I come at this, my work as an organizer, right? I'm not coming from the perspective of the diocese.
Sure.
So what I do is to complement, this process that the diocese has. What I think is most important is if there's enough listening to women in the church through the synodal process, what their desires are for leadership, and that the church takes that into consideration, that's the most important thing.
Let me pose a question to you. Is there enough? Are they listening enough? Or do you think it still needs a way to go for us to reach that point?
I think absolutely, to create a culture of listening can't be done overnight. So what I'm hoping from this whole effort that Pope Francis is leading is that local churches really take it seriously, that listening to what people's experiences are, whether it's related to their gender, their sexuality, their socioeconomic status, all of that can be cultivated, right? So it's not just, that we go to Mass on Sunday and go home, but that church is this proactive encountering of others and meeting them where their needs are.
Okay. Carla, thank you so much, as well as for you, Reverend Montelongo. Thank you so much for taking time on this Sunday evening to join us for ABC-7 Extra Sunday Edition.
Thank you for watching. ABC-7 News is now available on any of these streaming services, as well as the